10 minutes. That is exactly how long Elijah Vance, the CEO of Titan Logistics, and my own father-in-law gave me to pack up a decade of my life. He stood at the head of the mahogany conference table, his face twisted in a triumphant sneer, and fired me in front of the entire executive board. He thought he was stripping me of my dignity. He thought he was sending me home to cry. Instead, I smiled, picked up my purse, and walked out. He did not know that when I left, 52 of his best employees would stand up and walk out right behind me. He did not know that his daughter Simone was laughing too soon. And he certainly did not know that the legal director was about to turn ghost white and whisper, "Call the lawyers now." Before I tell you how I brought a billion-dollar empire to its knees with a single USB drive, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone exactly who you are. The air in the 40th floor conference room was always cold, but that morning it felt like the inside of a freezer. I stood at the front of the room, the Chicago skyline gleaming behind me through floor-to-ceiling glass. I was midway through presenting the Q3 projections numbers that were undeniably impressive thanks to the operational overhaul I had led as Chief Operating Officer. The graphs on the screen showed a 20% increase in efficiency. I felt a surge of pride. Titan Logistics was not just a company to me. It was the beast I had tamed. I turned to address the board members, my voice steady and professional. However, before I could finish my sentence, a heavy leather binder slammed onto the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Enough of this charade!" Elijah Vance's voice boomed across the room. He did not look like a proud father-in-law. He looked like a predator who had finally cornered his prey. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with an air of finality. "We do not need to hear any more lies from a traitor." The room went deadly silent, the kind of silence where you can hear the hum of the projector and the rapid beating of your own heart. I lowered the clicker, my expression remaining neutral. "Excuse me, Elijah," I asked, keeping my tone polite but firm. "Do not play innocent with me, Jada." He slid a manila envelope across the polished wood surface. It spun until it stopped right in front of me. "Open it." I opened the envelope. Inside were grainy photographs. They showed me sitting at a dinner table in a dimly lit restaurant laughing with a man. I recognized the man immediately. He was the CEO of Omni Freight, our biggest competitor. The timestamps on the photos were from last week. The only problem was I had been in bed with the flu last week. These were doctored. It was a deep fake, and a lazy one at that. I looked up and saw Brad, my brother-in-law, sitting to Elijah's right. Brad was leaning back in his chair, a smug, satisfied grin plastered on his pale face. He adjusted his silk tie, his eyes mocking me. "You are fired for corporate espionage and breach of fiduciary duty," Elijah announced, his voice dripping with venom. "We have evidence that you have been selling our proprietary routing algorithms to Omni Freight." I looked at the photos again, then at the board members. They were all avoiding my gaze, looking at their tablets or their hands. They knew. They all knew this was a setup. Elijah had been looking for a reason to oust me ever since Brad married his daughter Simone and decided he wanted to play executive. Brad had an online MBA and a lot of ambition, but zero talent. I was the obstacle. "This is ridiculous," I said, tossing the photos back. "You know these are fake." "I was homesick last Tuesday. Julian can verify that." I looked at my husband Julian, who was sitting at the far end of the table. He did not look up. He was staring intently at his water glass, his shoulders hunched. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. Even my husband was in on it. "Your husband is loyal to this company and this family," Elijah barked. "Unlike you. You are a liability, Jada. You are terminated effective immediately. Security is already on their way up. You have 10 minutes to clear your desk and get out of my building before I have you dragged out." 10 minutes. After 10 years of working 16-hour days, after missing anniversaries and holidays to save this company from bankruptcy, after building the very software that made them millions. 10 minutes. I looked at Brad, who winked at me. I looked at Elijah, whose chest was puffed out with the arrogance of a man who thinks he is untouchable. I did not scream. I did not beg. I did not even cry. I just nodded slowly. Understood, I said. My voice was dangerously calm. I closed my laptop. I unplugged the HDMI cable. 10 minutes is generous, Elijah sneered. Brad will be taking over your office and your duties immediately. Leave the laptop. That is company property. I slid the laptop across the table toward Brad. He stopped it with one hand, looking like a child who had just been given a new toy he did not know how to use. Good luck, Brad, I said. You are going to need it. I turned my back on them and walked toward the heavy glass doors. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for me to break, waiting for the scene they wanted to gossip about at the country club. I would not give them the satisfaction. I walked out of that boardroom with my head high, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the marble floor, marking the countdown to their destruction. The walk from the boardroom to my corner office felt miles long. The open-plan workspace was eerily quiet. News travels fast in a corporate tower. Heads turned as I passed. People pretended to type, but I could feel their eyes tracking me. Whispers trailed behind me like smoke. I walked straight to my office, the one with the view of the lake, the one I had earned through blood, sweat, and tears. Inside, I did not frantically sweep things into a box. I moved with precision. I took the framed photo of my son from the desk. I took my favorite fountain pen. And then I walked over to the windowsill and picked up a small, struggling bonsai tree. It was the only living thing in this sterile environment that I actually cared about. The door to my office opened. I did not need to turn around to know who it was. The scent of expensive cologne and weak will filled the room. Jada, Julian said. His voice was soft, pleading. I continued to wipe down the surface of my desk with a tissue, refusing to look at him. Dad made me do it. He continued, stepping closer. He said if I did not back him up, he would cut me out of the will. He said Brad is family, and you are... You know how he is. I finally turned to face him. My husband. The man I had vowed to love and cherish. He looked pathetic in his tailored suit, wringing his hands like a naughty schoolboy. I know exactly how he is, Julian, I said, my voice flat. And now I know exactly who you are. You sat there and watched them frame me with photos Brad clearly photoshopped. You know I was home with you that night. You made me soup. I can fix this later, he stammered. Once Dad calms down, just sign the separation agreement he wants. Leave the assets. We can start over. I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. There is no we, Julian, not anymore. I picked up the bonsai tree in one hand. With the other, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a red USB drive. It was small, unassuming, but it contained the encryption keys to the entire logistical framework I had built. Without this, the automated shipping system was just a fancy paperweight. Simone, my sister-in-law, appeared in the doorway. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my first car. Her arms crossed, a smirk painted on her face. She had been waiting for this moment for years. Leaving so soon, she asked, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Oh, and give me that drive. Brad said you might try to steal company data. That belongs to Titan. I looked at the red USB drive in my hand. Then I looked at Simone. This? I asked, holding it up. Yes, give it to me, she demanded, stepping forward and holding out her hand. You are lucky. Daddy is not pressing charges. Hand it over. I smiled. It was the kind of smile a shark gives before it bites. You want the data? I asked. I threw the USB drive onto the hardwood floor. Before she could react, I brought the heel of my stiletto down on it. The plastic crunched loudly. I twisted my heel, grinding the internal chip into dust. Oops, I said, stepping back. Clumsy me. Simone shrieked, looking at the shattered pieces on the floor. You crazy witch, Daddy is going to kill you! I stepped over the debris, holding my bonsai tree like a shield. Tell Elijah he can try, I said, but he might want to check the server room first. It is trash now. Just like this company. I walked past her, brushing my shoulder against hers. I stepped out into the main bullpen where 52 pairs of eyes were watching me. I did not say a word. I did not have to. I just looked at Marcus, my IT director, and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. It was time. The real show was about to begin. I stepped out of my office, and the heavy glass door clicked shut behind me with a finality that echoed through the entire floor. The bullpen, usually a chaotic symphony of ringing phones and shouting logistics coordinators, was deadly silent. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a storm breaks. Every single eye was fixed on me. They had heard the shouting from the conference room. They had seen security hovering by the elevators. Elijah and Brad thought they were witnessing my walk of shame. They thought they were watching a defeated woman leaving the empire she helped build. They were wrong. This was not a retreat. It was a revolution. I adjusted my blazer and began to walk down the main aisle. My heels struck the concrete floor with a steady, rhythmic cadence. I did not look at the floor. I did not look at the security guards. I looked straight ahead at the people who had spent the last 5 years in the trenches with me. I locked eyes with Marcus, my director of IT. He was sitting at his station, his hands hovering over his keyboard, waiting. Marcus was a genius who could have worked for Google or Apple, but he stayed at Titan because of me. He stayed because I respected him. I did not say a word. I did not have to. I simply caught his gaze and gave a single sharp nod. That was the signal. Marcus stood up immediately. The sound of his ergonomic chair rolling back was the first note in the cascade. He reached up and unclipped his security badge from his lanyard. He looked at it for a second, then let it drop onto his desk. Clack. Then he picked up his leather messenger bag and stepped into the aisle behind me. Then Sarah from sales stood up. She was the top earner for 3 years, running the woman who brought in the Amazon contract. She placed her headset on her desk and stood up. Clack. Her badge hit the laminate. Then David from logistics, the man who knew every shipping route in North America by heart. Clack. Then Naya from HR. Clack. Then the entire analytics team. Clack, clack, clack. It was a domino effect of loyalty. One by one, row by row, 52 of the most talented people in the industry stood up. They did not pack boxes. They did not clear their browser histories. They just grabbed their coats and their bags. The sound of 52 badges hitting 52 desks sounded like hail hitting a tin roof. It was a beautiful sound. It was the sound of Titan Logistics dying. The door to my old office flew open and slammed against the wall. Brad stumbled out, his face flushed a deep, ugly red. He looked like he was about to have a stroke. He saw the empty chairs. He saw the dark monitors. He saw the line of people, a silent army marching behind me toward the elevators. "Stop!" Brad screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "Where do you think you are going? Sit down. Everyone sit down right now." No one moved. No one even looked at him. They just kept walking, their eyes forward, following me. "You cannot leave!" Brad yelled, running down the aisle to block the path to the elevators. He looked desperate, his arms spread wide as if he could physically hold back the tide. "If you walk out that door, you are all fired. Do you hear me? I will sue every single one of you for breach of contract. You will never work in this industry again. I will make sure you are blacklisted." The group came to a halt. I stopped and turned slowly to face him. Marcus stepped up beside me, towering over Brad. Marcus adjusted his glasses and looked down at my brother-in-law with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. "Check the paperwork, Brad," Marcus said, his voice calm and smooth, cutting through the tension like a knife. "We do not have contracts with Titan Logistics." Brad looked confused, his eyes darting between us. "What are you talking about? You work here. I sign your paychecks." "No," Marcus replied, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips. "You sign checks to a vendor. Jada hired us. Our employment contracts are with Atlas Solutions. Titan just leases our services from her. And since you just illegally terminated the CEO of Atlas Solutions without cause, our obligation to be in this building ended exactly 3 minutes ago. Brad's mouth fell open. He looked from Marcus to me, the color draining from his face as the realization hit him. He had not just fired me, he had fired his entire workforce. I stood by the elevator buttons and pressed the down arrow. The light turned green. "We are not your employees, Brad," I said, my voice cold. "We are the product." And the product just left the building. The elevator doors chimed open. I stepped inside, followed by Marcus, Sarah, David, and as many others as could fit. As the doors slid shut, the last thing I saw was Brad standing alone in the middle of a silent, empty room, realizing he was the captain of a ghost ship. The silver doors of the elevator slid shut with a soft chime, sealing Jada and her army of 52 loyalists away from the wreckage they left behind. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. The bullpen, usually alive with the hum of commerce and the ringing of phones, was now a vast wasteland of empty chairs and dark monitors. Brad stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving. He stared at the digital numbers above the elevator, counting down to the lobby, his face a mask of disbelief that was slowly curdling into panic. He spun around, his eyes wild, searching for a target. The only person left standing in the entire open plan office was Robert, the legal director. Robert was a man who had survived 30 years of corporate warfare by knowing exactly when to keep his head down. But right now, he looked like a man facing a firing squad. His skin was the color of old paper, and he was clutching his tablet so hard his knuckles were white. "Did you see that, Robert?" Brad shouted, marching toward him. "That was a coordinated strike. That was mutiny. I want injunctions filed immediately. I want restraining orders. I want every single one of them sued for job abandonment. Draft the paperwork right now." Robert did not move. He did not even blink. He just stared at the screen of his tablet, his breath coming in shallow, terrified gasps. "I cannot do that, Brad," Robert whispered. His voice was so faint that the hum of the air conditioning threatened to drown it out. Elijah stormed out of the conference room, his face a thundercloud of fury. He looked at the empty desks, and the veins in his neck began to bulge. "What do you mean, you cannot?" Elijah roared, closing the distance to the lawyer in 3 long strides. "You are the legal director. Do not tell me what you cannot do. Fix this mess. Get them back here or destroy them in court." Robert looked up, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He took a step back as Elijah loomed over him. "Sir, you do not understand," Robert stammered. "You did not just fire an employee. You terminated the master service agreement with our primary vendor." Elijah stopped cold. "Speak English, Robert, or you will be next." "Jada does not just work here," Robert said, his voice trembling. "She owns Atlas Solutions. That is the staffing agency that technically employs everyone in this room, the IT department, the logistics coordinators, the sales team. They are not on the Titan payroll, sir. They are Atlas employees. We pay Atlas a fee, and Jada pays them." Brad laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound that grated on the nerves. "So what? Who cares who writes the checks? They work in our building. They answer to us." "No, Brad, they do not." Robert snapped, losing his patience as the magnitude of the disaster became clear. "The contract Jada wrote 5 years ago has a specific clause. It is the Founder Protection Clause. If the CEO of Atlas Solutions is terminated by the client without cause, the exclusivity agreement is voided immediately." Robert looked at Elijah, bracing himself for the impact. Under Illinois labor law, they are not walking out on their jobs. They are being recalled by their employer. They have every legal right to leave. And because we just fired Jada, effectively terminating the vendor contract, we are liable for the remainder of their yearly salaries. We just lost our entire workforce, and we owe Jada millions in early termination fees. The silence returned, but this time it was heavy with the weight of total collapse. Elijah looked around at the ghost town he had created. He realized that his arrogance had just cost him everything. He had fired the one person who held the keys to the kingdom. "You said she was just an employee." Elijah whispered, his voice shaking with a terrifying rage. He looked at Brad. "You said she was disposable." "I thought she was." Brad squeaked, backing away until he hit a filing cabinet. "You idiot!" Elijah screamed. The sound tore through his throat, a primal roar of destruction. He grabbed a heavy crystal ashtray from the reception desk. It was a solid block of glass heavy enough to kill a man. With a cry of pure fury, he hurled it across the room. It flew past Brad's head, missing him by inches, and smashed into the drywall with a violence that sent shards of crystal and plaster raining down onto the empty carpet. "Get her back!" Elijah bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Call the lawyers. Call the police. I do not care what you have to do. Get her back here now." I slid into the driver's seat of my matte black Mercedes G-Wagon. The heavy door closed with a reassuring thud, shutting out the noise of the city and the chaos I had just left on the 40th floor. The leather was cool against my back. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive interior and freedom. My hands were steady as I gripped the steering wheel. I expected to feel fear. I expected to feel the crushing weight of unemployment. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. I felt like a weapon that had finally been unsheathed. My phone, resting on the center console, lit up. It vibrated against the leather, shattering the silence. I glanced at the screen. It was not my husband Julian begging for forgiveness. It was not Elijah screaming threats. The caller ID read, "Sterling Vance, CEO of Omni Retail Group, Titan's biggest client, the $50 million whale that kept the lights on." News traveled fast in Chicago, but this was breaking the sound barrier. I pressed the answer button and put it on speaker. "Jada." Sterling's voice was deep and urgent. "Tell me the rumors are false. Tell me Elijah did not just do something incredibly stupid." I leaned back in the seat, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. "I cannot lie to you, Sterling," I said, my voice smooth and professional. "As of 10 minutes ago, I am no longer the chief operating officer of Titan Logistics." Elijah and the board decided to go in a different direction. There was a pause on the other end. A heavy, pregnant silence. Then a curse word that would have made a sailor blush. "A different direction." Sterling scoffed. "You mean straight off a cliff?" "Listen to me, Jada. We are entering Q4. The holiday rush starts in 2 weeks. My entire supply chain relies on the architecture you built. I do not trust Elijah to run a lemonade stand, let alone a global logistics network. And that son-in-law of his, Brad, he thinks a supply chain is something you wear around your neck." I chuckled softly. It was a dark sound. "Brad is the new COO, I informed him. Elijah gave him my office." Sterling groaned. "That settles it then. I am not letting my inventory rot in a warehouse because of nepotism. I need to know right now, Jada. Does the Omni contract stay with the building, or does it go with the brain?" I looked up through the windshield at the towering glass monolith of Titan Logistics. I could almost see the panic starting to spread through the floors above. They thought they owned the clients because they owned the servers. They forgot that relationships are built on trust, and competence is the only currency that matters. "You know the answer to that, Sterling," I said, starting the engine. The engine roared to life, a low, powerful growl that vibrated through the chassis. "Titan without me is just a shell corporation with a nice view. It is a dead body that has not realized it stopped breathing yet." "That is what I thought," Sterling said, the relief evident in his voice. "I am exercising the key person clause in our contract. If you are gone, the deal is void. Where are you going?" I shifted the car into drive. "I am going to start something new, Sterling, something better, and I am taking the best people in the industry with me." "Good," Sterling said. "Send me the new contract when you land. I do not care what the letterhead says as long as your signature is at the bottom." I hung up the phone. The $50 million contract was gone. Titan was bleeding out. and they did not even know they had been cut. I pulled out of the parking garage and into the stream of traffic, leaving the past in my rearview mirror. The sun was shining, and for the first time in a long time, the road ahead looked wide open. The drive home usually calmed me. The sight of Lake Michigan, vast and endless, had a way of putting corporate battles into perspective. But today the lake looked gray and turbulent, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. I parked the G-Wagon in my reserved spot, the engine's purr dying away into silence. I sat there for a moment, steeling myself. The boardroom was just the opening act. The real war was waiting for me in the penthouse. I took the private elevator up to the top floor. The doors opened directly into our foyer, a space designed to impress with marble floors and art that cost more than most people's homes. But today, the pristine elegance was marred by chaos. My luggage, 2 Louis Vuitton suitcases and a set of garment bags, was piled haphazardly in the middle of the hall. It looked like trash left out for collection. I stepped out of the elevator, my heels clicking sharply on the stone. Julian was sitting on the velvet bench near the door, a glass of dark red wine in his hand. He was already drunk. It was barely noon. He looked up at me, his eyes glassy and unfocused, a crooked smile playing on his lips. "You are home early," he slurred, swirling the wine in his glass. "Or should I say you are leaving early?" I looked at my bags, then at him. The man I had married, the man who had promised to stand by me, was now just another pawn in his father's game. "Did you pack these, Julian?" I asked, my voice calm. "Or did you have the housekeeper do it because you were too busy drinking your courage?" He laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. He stood up, swaying slightly, and took a step toward me. "It does not matter who packed them, Jada. What matters is that they are packed." Dad called. He told me everything. "You tried to burn down the company. You tried to steal our legacy." "Our legacy," I scoffed. "I built that legacy, Julian. You just spent the dividends." He narrowed his eyes, his expression hardening into something cruel. "Not anymore," he said. "Dad told me to change the codes. You are locked out, Jada. Locked out of the company. Locked out of the accounts. And as of right now, locked out of this marriage." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. He tossed it onto the pile of luggage. It landed with a soft thud. "Sign the divorce papers," he demanded. "Leave the assets. Leave the shares. Dad says if you sign now and walk away quietly, he will not sue you for corporate sabotage. He will not send you to prison for destroying that drive. It is a generous offer, Jada. Take it." I looked at the papers. Then I looked at Julian. He thought he had won. He thought he held all the cards because his father told him so. He did not realize he was playing a game I had already rigged. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I opened the camera app and hit record. I held it up, framing Julian, the wine glass, and my bags in the shot. "Say that again, Julian," I said, my voice steady. "Tell me again how your father is using legal threats to coerce me into signing away my marital assets under duress. I want the judge to hear it clearly." Julian froze. He stared at the phone, then at me. The cruelty in his eyes flickered, replaced by a sudden flash of fear. He lunged for the phone. "Put that away," he shouted. "You are not recording this." I stepped back easily, keeping the camera trained on him. "Too late," I said. "It is already in the cloud, just like the evidence of your little side account in the Caymans. Did you think I did not know about that? Or about the consulting fees you have been paying to that Instagram model?" His face went pale. The glass of wine slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor, a dark red stain spreading like blood. You knew," he whispered. "I know everything, Julian," I said, lowering the phone but keeping it recording. "I suggest you call your father back. Tell him his threats do not work on me. And tell him he is going to need a better lawyer. Because I am not just taking my bags. I am taking everything." I grabbed the handle of my suitcase and walked past him to the door. I did not look back at the shattered glass or the shattered man. I had a war to win. The sun rose over Chicago, casting a deceptively peaceful golden glow on the glass facade of the Titan Logistics Tower. Inside, however, the atmosphere was anything but serene. It was the first morning of the new regime. Brad sat in my former office, his feet propped up on the desk I had cleared only yesterday. He was sipping an espresso, feeling like the king of the world. He had finally won. He had the title, the corner office, and the power. He adjusted his silk tie, took a deep breath of the filtered air, and decided it was time to check the numbers. He wanted to see the empire he now commanded. Brad swiveled the chair around to face the triple monitor setup I had left behind. He reached for the keyboard and typed in the universal administrative credentials Elijah had given him. He hit enter with a flourish, expecting to see the complex dashboard of global shipping routes, real-time inventory tracking, and profit margins that I had meticulously coded. Instead, the screens flickered. A single harsh red box appeared in the center of the middle monitor. It pulsed like a warning beacon. The text was simple, brutal, and terrifying. Access denied. User not found. License key invalid. Brad frowned. He typed the password again, slower this time, assuming he had made a typo. He hit enter. Access denied. System lockdown initiated. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He tried to bypass the login screen, tapping keys frantically. Nothing happened. The system was bricked. It was a digital fortress, and he was standing on the outside without a key. Then the noise started. It began as a low murmur from the bullpen outside, the sound of confused voices. Then came the ringing. One phone started, then another, then 10. Within seconds, the entire floor was a cacophony of shrill, demanding rings. The sound was deafening. It was the sound of a supply chain snapping. Brad stood up, knocking his espresso onto the floor. He ran to the door and threw it open. The few junior employees who hadn't walked out with me were standing at their desks, holding receivers away from their ears, looking terrified. "Mr. Brad," one of the interns shouted, her voice trembling. "I have the Port Authority in Los Angeles on line 1. They say the automated clearance codes for 3,000 containers were rejected. The gates are closed. Nothing is moving." Brad stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Tell them to wait," he yelled. "Just tell them it is a glitch. I have fresh foods on line 2. Another employee called out, panic rising in his voice. "Their shipment of frozen seafood is stuck on the tarmac in Miami. The refrigeration units are not receiving the remote signal to stay on. They say $2 million of lobster is going to rot in the sun if we do not fix it in an hour." Brad felt the room spinning. This was not a glitch. This was an apocalypse. He needed help. He needed the people who understood how the machine worked. He needed the tech team. "Marcus!" Brad screamed, sprinting down the hallway toward the server room. "Marcus, get out here and fix this right now!" He reached the heavy steel door of the IT department and slammed his shoulder against it, bursting into the room. He expected to see the glow of screens and the busy hum of coders fixing the problem. He stopped dead in his tracks. The room was dark. The ergonomic chairs were empty, pushed haphazardly against the desks. The monitors were black. There was no one there, not a single soul. The silence in the server room was heavy and absolute. Brad stood in the center of the empty room, the screams of angry clients filtering in from the hallway. He looked at the silent servers, the blinking lights that indicated a system in stasis. He realized then that he hadn't just fired a woman. He had fired the brain of the company, and now the body was going into cardiac arrest. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it. He dialed the only number he could think of. He dialed Elijah. "Dad." Brad whispered into the phone, his voice cracking. "The system is gone. It is all gone." I pulled my G-Wagon into the circular driveway of Elijah's Buckhead estate. The house was a monument to old money and new debt, a sprawling Georgian mansion that looked perfect on the outside, but was rotting on the inside, just like the family that lived there. I was not there to make peace. I was not there to negotiate. I was there for one thing only: my 4-year-old son Leo. I marched up the stone steps and rang the bell. I did not wait. I rang it again, and again. Finally, the heavy oak door swung open. My mother-in-law, Beatrice Vance, stood there. She was wearing a Chanel suit that I knew I had paid for with last year's bonus. She did not move to let me in. She stood planted in the doorway, her arms crossed, a look of nervous defiance on her face. "Where is Leo?" I asked, my voice cutting through the humid Atlanta air. Beatrice pursed her lips. "He is playing in the sunroom, and he is staying there until you fix what you broke." "Excuse me," I asked, stepping closer. "Elijah called." Beatrice said, her voice trembling slightly. "He said the company is paralyzed. He said you locked them out. You are going to give me the new server passwords, Jada. You are going to unlock the system right now. If you do not, you are not taking Leo." I stared at her. I looked at this woman, who I had treated like a mother for 10 years. She was holding my child hostage for an admin password. "Beatrice," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "you have exactly 3 seconds to step aside. If you do not, I am not calling a locksmith. I am calling the police, and I will have you arrested for kidnapping. Do you want to see that on the evening news? Grandmother arrested for holding child ransom." Her eyes widened. She took a half step back, her resolve crumbling. But before she could move, Simone appeared from the hallway. My sister-in-law was holding a crystal flute of champagne, her eyes bright with malice and day drinking. "Do not let her in, Mom," Simone shrieked. "She ruined everything. Brad is going to lose his job because of her." Simone lunged at me. It was a clumsy, desperate attack fueled by alcohol and entitlement. She aimed her manicured nails at my face, screaming something about ruining her life. I did not flinch. I did not even raise my hands. I simply pivoted on my heel, a smooth, practiced motion. Simone's momentum carried her forward. She stumbled past me, her heels catching on the expensive Persian rug. She flailed, trying to find her balance, but it was too late. She crashed headfirst into the antique console table behind me. On that table sat a meticulously arranged tower of champagne glasses ready for their evening gala. The sound was spectacular. Glass shattered in a cascading symphony of destruction. Champagne exploded outwards, soaking Simone's silk dress and drenching the rug. She landed in the middle of the wet, jagged mess with a shriek of pain and humiliation. Beatrice screamed, her hands flying to her mouth. I did not look at Simone. I stepped over a shard of crystal and walked past Beatrice into the house. I went straight to the sunroom. Leo looked up from his blocks, his face lighting up. "Mommy!" he yelled, running into my arms. I picked him up, holding him tight against my chest. I grabbed his backpack and walked back to the foyer. Simone was sobbing on the floor, picking glass out of her hair. Beatrice was frozen against the wall. I paused at the door. "Tell Elijah the password price just went up," I said. I walked out to my car, buckled my son in, and drove away, leaving them to clean up their own mess. The warehouse in the West Loop was a stark contrast to the sterile luxury of the Titan Tower. It smelled of old brick-roasted coffee and revolution. I had leased this space 6 months ago under a shell company, sensing that the day would come when I needed a lifeboat. I just did not expect that lifeboat to turn into a battleship so quickly. When I walked in holding Leo's hand, the hum of activity was already deafening. 52 of the sharpest minds in the logistics industry had transformed the empty industrial loft into a command center. Folding tables were arranged in rows. Laptops were open. Whiteboards were already filled with shipping routes and client lists. This was not a group of unemployed people wondering where their next paycheck would come from. This was King Logistics, and we were already at war. I handed Leo a tablet and settled him on a beanbag chair in the corner with his noise-canceling headphones. Sarah, my VP of sales, walked up to me. She looked more alive than she had in years. She handed me a coffee. "Omni Retail just sent over the signed contract," she said, her eyes gleaming. $50 million. It is official. We are live." I took a sip of the coffee. It tasted like victory. "Good," I said. Get the fleet moving. I want their inventory on the road by midnight. Just then, Marcus called out from the back of the room. He had set up his station in what used to be a freight elevator. He was surrounded by 4 monitors, the screens cascading with lines of green code. Jada, you need to see this, Marcus said, his voice tight. I walked over, the click of my heels on the concrete drawing the room's attention. What is it? I asked, leaning over his shoulder. Brad is getting desperate, Marcus said, pointing at the screen. He is not just trying to reset the passwords anymore. He hired outside help. I am seeing a brute force attack on the firewall. The IP traces back to a black hat group in Eastern Europe. He is paying hackers to break into the Atlas system. I watched the lines of code scroll by. Brad was not just incompetent, he was reckless. Attempting to hack a vendor's proprietary software was a federal crime. He was handing me the nails for his own coffin. He wants to regain control of the routing software, Marcus explained. If he gets in, he can override the lockout and seize the data. I can block the IP range. I can shut him out completely. I stared at the screen. I thought about Brad sitting in my old office, sweating through his expensive shirt, terrified of his father-in-law's wrath. If I blocked him, he would know he failed. He would try something else. He might even try something legal. No, I said softly. Marcus looked up at me, confused. No, do not block him, I said, a plan forming in my mind. If you block him, he panics. I want him to feel safe. I want him to think he won. I pointed to a specific sector of the code. Open a backdoor, I ordered. Wrote his connection to the sandbox environment. The sandbox was a simulation. It was a mirror image of the real system used for testing and training. It looked real. It acted real. It allowed you to issue commands, route trucks, and manage inventory. The only difference was that it was not connected to the real world. Nothing actually moved. You want me to let him play a video game? Marcus asked, a slow grin spreading across his face. Exactly, I said. Let him think he cracked the code. Let him issue orders to the fleet. Let him think he is saving the day. Meanwhile, the real trucks will be taking orders from us. By the time he realizes he has been moving ghost ships, his clients will have already signed with us. Marcus began typing furiously. Consider the door open, boss. He is in. I watched the screen as the red warning lights turned green. Brad was in the sandbox. He was currently commanding a fleet of imaginary trucks to save his crumbling empire. I turned back to the room. All right, everyone, I announced. Brad is distracted. Let us go steal his company. The heavy oak doors of Le Monde swung open, and Julian strode in with the confidence of a man who believed he had just inherited the kingdom. The restaurant was the kind of place where the water menu had prices, and the lighting was designed to make everyone look rich. Beside him was Tiana, an Instagram model whose affection was strictly transactional. She was currently filming a story for her followers, panning the camera over the crystal chandeliers and then landing on Julian. He flashed a winning smile, adjusting the lapels of his suit. He felt invincible. Jada was gone. His father and Brad had reclaimed the throne, and Julian was ready to enjoy the spoils of a war he had watched from the sidelines. They were seated in a plush velvet booth near the window. Julian ordered the Wagyu beef, the truffle fries, and a bottle of Cabernet that cost more than his first car. He wanted to celebrate. He wanted to taste the victory. To the new era, Julian said, raising his glass. To Brad running the show and me spending the money. Tiana clinked her glass against his, her eyes glued to the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist that Julian had promised to upgrade next month. So does this mean we are going to Paris for Fashion Week? She asked, taking a sip of the expensive wine. Baby, we are going everywhere, Julian boasted. Jada kept a tight leash on the accounts, but she is history. The company credit line is wide open now. The meal was decadent. Julian ate with gusto, fueling his ego with every bite. He felt like a titan of industry. He forgot that he had never negotiated a contract or managed a supply chain in his life. He only knew how to swipe a card. When the check arrived, it came in a leather folder that smelled of old money. The total was $540. Julian did not even blink. He reached into his wallet and pulled out the heavy black Titan Logistics corporate card. It was a supplementary card issued under the executive account, but he treated it like his personal piggy bank. He tossed it onto the table with a flourish. "Take care of that," he said to the waiter, not bothering to make eye contact. "And add 20% for yourself." The waiter bowed and took the folder. Julian leaned back, putting his arm around the booth behind Tiana. "See?" he said. "This is the life. No more budgets. No more lectures from Jada about fiscal responsibility. Just us and the good life." Tiana smiled, but her eyes were already drifting to the next table, where a famous rapper was seated. The waiter returned. He was walking differently this time. His head was down and his steps were brisk. He stopped at the table and cleared his throat. "I apologize, sir," the waiter said softly. "The card was declined." Julian laughed. "That is impossible. It is a black card. There is no limit. You probably swiped it wrong. Run it again." "We did, sir. 3 times. The machine says the card has been deactivated." "Do you have another form of payment?" Julian felt a cold prickle of fear at the base of his spine. Tiana turned to look at him, her eyebrow arching perfectly. "Deactivated." Julian stammered. "That does not make sense. Here, try this one." He pulled out his personal visa. He knew it was near its limit, but maybe there was enough room for dinner. The waiter took it and walked away. "Just a glitch, babe," Julian said, wiping a bead of sweat from his upper lip. "Banks are so sensitive these days." The waiter was back in record time. "Declined, sir." The silence at the table was deafening. Tiana pulled her phone out and stopped recording. She looked at Julian with an expression that was 1 part pity and 9 parts disgust. Julian grabbed his phone and dialed the accounting department at Titan. He needed to yell at someone. He needed to fix this before Tiana walked out. "Linda, pick up," he hissed into the phone. "Hello." Linda's voice answered. She sounded tired. "Linda, why are my cards not working?" Julian shouted. "I am at a client dinner and I look like an idiot. Fix it." "Mr. Vance," Linda said, her voice dropping to a professional monotone. "I cannot fix it. The primary cardholder canceled all supplementary cards an hour ago." "Primary cardholder," Julian said, confused. "That is Dad. Dad would not cut me off." "No, sir," Linda corrected him. The executive credit line was guaranteed by Jada King's personal assets as part of the Atlas Solutions vendor agreement. When Mr. Vance terminated her contract, he triggered the separation clause. Jada called the bank immediately. She froze every account linked to her name. "That includes your expense card, Julian. You have 0 credit." The phone slipped from Julian's hand and clattered onto the table. Jada. She was not just gone. She had burned the bridge and he was standing in the middle of it. "So you are broke," Tiana said. Her voice was flat. "No." "Tiana, listen. It is just a legal thing." Julian pleaded, reaching for her hand. "I can fix this. I just need to call my dad." "Your dad is not here, Julian," Tiana said, standing up. "And neither am I. I do not do charity work." She grabbed her purse and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. The entire dining room watched her go. Then they turned to look at Julian. He was alone in the booth with a $500 bill and a waiter who looked ready to call the police. He realized then that Jada had not just locked the doors to the office. She had locked him out of his own life. The neon sign of the dive bar flickered overhead, casting long, twitching shadows into the alleyway where Brad stood waiting. He checked his Rolex every 30 seconds. It was a fake, just like his degree, but it looked expensive enough to get him mugged in a neighborhood like this. He wiped his clammy palms on his suit trousers. He should have been at the office trying to figure out why the servers were dead. He should have been answering the screaming clients. Instead, he was here hiding in the dark, because some debts could not be ignored. A black SUV pulled up to the curb, blocking the alley entrance. The window rolled down. A man sat in the back seat. He did not look like a movie villain. He looked like an accountant who broke kneecaps as a hobby. This was Mr. Volkov. Brad owed him money. A lot of money. $2 million in bad sports bets and high-stakes poker losses that Brad had accumulated while pretending to be a wealthy executive. Get in, Volkov said. It was not a request. Brad opened the door and slid onto the leather seat. The car smelled of stale cigar smoke and fear. Mr. Volkov, Brad said, his voice pitching too high. I have the money coming. It is just tied up in assets right now. You know how it is. Liquidity issues. Volkov turned to look at him. His eyes were dead shark eyes. I do not care about your liquidity, Brad, Volkov said calmly. I care about my 2 million. And I read the news. You are the chief operating officer of Titan Logistics now. You are the big boss. That means you have access to the big accounts. Brad swallowed hard. He did have access, or at least he was supposed to. But the system was locked. The accounts were frozen by Jada. He could not tell Volkov that. If Volkov knew Brad was powerless, he would be a dead man walking. Yes, Brad lied. I am running the show now. The money is not a problem. I just need a little more time to move some funds around. Corporate bureaucracy. Volkov checked his watch. You have 48 hours, Volkov said. $2 million in my crypto wallet by Friday night. If it is not there, I will not come for the money. I will come for you, and I will send pieces of you to your wife until the debt is paid. Brad felt the blood drain from his face. 48 hours. It was impossible. He did not have $2 million. He did not even have 2,000. Get out, Volkov said. Brad stumbled out of the car. The SUV sped away, leaving him alone in the rain. He leaned against the brick wall, hyperventilating. He needed cash. Fast. He could not get it from the bank. Jada had locked the credit lines. He could not ask Elijah. The old man would kill him if he knew about the gambling. Then a thought struck him. A dark, desperate idea born of pure terror. The payroll fund. Titan processed payroll for 3,000 truck drivers on Thursday. It was a massive pool of liquid cash that sat in a clearing account before being distributed. It was millions of dollars. Jada usually approved the transfer, but Jada was gone. As the acting CEO, Brad had the physical security token for the wire transfers. He could access that account. He pushed off the wall, his eyes manic. He would transfer the money to Volkov. He would tell the drivers there was a technical glitch with the banks. He would buy himself time. Then once he figured out how to unlock the system and get the company running again, he would pay it back. No one would ever know. It was stealing, yes. But the alternative was a shallow grave. Brad straightened his tie. He had a robbery to commit. The emergency shareholders meeting was a masterpiece of damage control theater. Elijah stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his suit impeccable. He radiated confidence, the kind that had fooled investors for decades. Behind him, a massive screen displayed a generic pie chart showing stabilized growth. The room was packed with nervous investors, their faces illuminated by the glow of tablets and phones, all checking the plummeting stock price. Ladies and gentlemen. Elijah began, his voice smooth and reassuring. I know there have been rumors. Wild, unfounded rumors. I am here to tell you that Titan Logistics is stronger than ever. The recent disruptions are merely a temporary hiccup caused by a personnel transition. A hand went up in the front row. It was Mr. Henderson, a major shareholder. Transition? Henderson asked, his tone skeptical. We heard your COO walked out with the entire staff. We heard the Omni contract is gone. Elijah chuckled, a dismissive sound. Fake news. Mr. Henderson. Jada King did not walk out. She was placed on medical leave. Unfortunately, the pressure of the job caused a severe mental health crisis. She was becoming erratic, paranoid. We had to remove her for her own safety and the safety of the company. It is a tragedy, really. The murmurs in the room softened. Mental health. It was a plausible story. It made Elijah look like the benevolent patriarch caring for a sick family member. As for the staff, Elijah continued gaining momentum. We are restructuring, trimming the fat. We are leaner, meaner, and ready to dominate Q4. Suddenly, the screen behind him flickered. The generic pie chart vanished. Static filled the massive display, accompanied by a high-pitched screech that made everyone cover their ears. Then the image cleared. It was not a slide deck. It was a live video feed. And there she was, Jada King, sitting in her new command center, looking very much sane and very much in control. "Good morning, shareholders," Jada's voice boomed through the ballroom speakers, clear and authoritative. "I hate to interrupt Elijah's fairy tale, but I thought you deserved the truth." Elijah spun around, his face draining of color. "Cut the feed," he screamed at the AV technicians. "Cut it now." But the technicians were locked out. Jada had bypassed the hotel's system. "I am not having a mental health crisis, Elijah." Jada continued, her eyes locking onto the camera. "I am having a moment of clarity, and so should you." She pressed a key. The screen split. On one side was Jada. On the other was a real-time financial dashboard of Titan Logistics. The numbers were bleeding red. "This is your real P&L statement," Jada said. "Titan has been operating at a loss for 3 quarters. The only thing keeping you afloat was the Omni contract, which is now gone. And speaking of gone," the screen changed again. This time it showed a bank transfer log. It was time-stamped from this morning. "This is a wire transfer authorized by your new COO, Brad Vance," Jada narrated. $500,000 sent to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. It was labeled consulting fees, but the recipient account is linked to a known gambling syndicate. The room erupted. Shareholders jumped to their feet, shouting. Phones were raised, recording the screen. Henderson looked furious. "You are stealing from us," Henderson yelled at Elijah. Elijah stood frozen on stage, the light of the screen casting him in a harsh, unflattering glare. He looked at the evidence of his son-in-law's theft, massive and undeniable. He looked at the angry mob of investors. And then he looked at Jada's face on the screen, calm and victorious. "The mental health crisis is not mine, Elijah," Jada said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "It is yours. You just let a thief rob your company blind because he was family." The screen went black, but the damage was done. The shareholders were not just nervous anymore. They were out for blood, and they were looking right at Elijah. The manor at Buckhead was a prison wrapped in velvet and ivy. Elijah paid $12,000 a month to keep his mother, Ms. Odessa Vance, tucked away in this high-end facility. He told the board she was senile. He told the family she was fragile. But I knew the truth. He kept her here because she was the only person on earth he feared. She was the one who bought the first truck 40 years ago with money she saved from cleaning houses. She was the majority shareholder. And she was the only one who could fire him. I walked past the reception desk with a purpose that made the staff hesitate to ask for my ID. I went straight to room 304. The door was open. Odessa was sitting by the window, staring out at a manicured garden she was rarely allowed to visit. Her silver hair was braided into a crown, and her posture was rigid. She did not look frail. She looked like a queen in exile. "Elijah sent you to see if I am dead yet?" she asked without turning around. Her voice was raspy, but it had the same sharp edge I remembered. I closed the door softly behind me. "I am not here for Elijah, Grandma Odessa," I said. "I am here because he is burning your legacy to the ground." And he handed the matches to Brad. She turned her wheelchair slowly. Her eyes were clouded with age, but the intelligence behind them was fierce. She looked me up and down, noting the absence of my company badge. "I heard the nurses gossip," she said. "They say you walked out. They say Titan is sinking." I pulled a chair close to her and sat down. I did not sugarcoat it. I did not treat her like a child. I treated her like the boss she was. I did not walk out. I was pushed. I said, "And Titan is not sinking. It is being looted." I pulled out my tablet and brought up the evidence. I showed her the unauthorized wire transfers Brad had made to the Cayman Islands. I showed her the plummeting stock price. I showed her the email from Omni Retail canceling their contract. He is stealing from you, Odessa, I said, my voice low and urgent. Brad has gambled away millions. Elijah is covering it up to save face. They are going to bankrupt the company within a month, and when they do, this place— I gestured to the luxurious room. This gets cut off too. Elijah will leave you here with nothing. Odessa stared at the screen. Her hands gnarled with arthritis, and decades of hard work began to shake. It was not fear. It was rage, a pure molten fury that radiated off her in waves. He thinks I am stupid, she hissed. He thinks because my legs do not work, my mind is gone. That boy never respected the work. He only loved the money. And that husband of Simone's. I told Elijah he was a snake the day he walked in. She looked up at me, her eyes locking onto mine. What do you need, Jada? I reached into my bag and pulled out a single document. It was a durable power of attorney. It revoked all previous authorizations and granted full control of her financial and voting assets to a designated proxy. Elijah has a medical proxy based on a forged competency hearing, I said. But we both know you are sound. If you sign this, it overrides his authority. It gives me control of your 51% stake. It gives me the power to veto the board. It gives me the power to stop them. Odessa looked at the paper. She looked at the pen in my hand. She did not hesitate. She snatched the pen with a grip that surprised me. He put me in here to silence me. She whispered, the pen scratching aggressively against the paper. He forgot that I am the one who gave him his voice. She signed her name. Odessa Vance. The signature was jagged, but it was bold. It was a declaration of war. She handed the document back to me. Take it, she commanded. Go back there. Take my company back. And Jada. I paused at the door, clutching the paper that would end Elijah's reign. Yes, Grandma. When you fire him. She said, a small, terrifying smile playing on her lips. Tell him his mother is very disappointed. The heavy steel door of our makeshift command center did not just open. It was kicked in with a violence that shook the dust from the rafters. 4 uniformed officers stormed into the warehouse, their hands resting on their holsters, barking orders for everyone to step away from their computers. The hum of 52 keyboards stopped instantly. The air in the room went from electric to terrified in a heartbeat. Behind the wall of blue uniforms walked Elijah. He was wearing a trench coat and a look of pure malicious glee. He pointed a shaking finger directly at me. That is her. Elijah shouted, his voice echoing off the exposed brick walls. Arrest her. She stole proprietary data. She is running a criminal enterprise using my company assets. Seize everything. The lead officer, a man with a thick neck and a face that said he had seen it all, marched up to my table. He slammed a piece of paper down on top of my laptop. Jada King, the officer barked. I have a warrant for the seizure of all electronic devices and data storage units related to Titan Logistics. Step away from the desk and put your hands where I can see them. I did not move. I did not raise my hands. I did not even blink. I just looked at the warrant, then at Elijah. He was smirking, already savoring the image of me being dragged out in handcuffs. He thought he had bought the law. He forgot that the law relies on facts, not bribes. Officer, I said, my voice calm enough to freeze water. Before you touch a single laptop in this room, I suggest you look at the document I am about to hand you. If you seize my equipment based on a false report filed by that man, the lawsuit I file against your precinct will be legendary. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a thick binder with a red spine. I slid it across the table. It stopped inches from the officer's hand. What is this? The officer asked, frowning. That is the United States Patent and Trademark Registration for the Atlas Logistics Operating System, I said, along with the master licensing agreement signed by Elijah Vance 5 years ago. I pointed to the highlighted paragraph on the first page. Read it, I commanded. The officer picked up the binder. He read the text. Then he read it again. His frown deepened. He looked over his shoulder at Elijah, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Vance," the officer said, his tone shifting from aggressive to annoyed. "This document states clearly that the source code and all associated data structures belong to King Intellectual Properties, LLC. It says Titan Logistics is merely a licensee with limited use rights." Elijah stepped forward, sputtering. "That is a technicality. She wrote it while working for me. It belongs to Titan. She is stealing my business." "No, Elijah," I interrupted, standing up. "It belongs to me. You were too cheap to buy the IP rights 5 years ago. You wanted to save money on the acquisition costs, so you agreed to a licensing model. You rent the software. You do not own it. And since you fired me without cause, the license is revoked." I turned back to the officer, locking eyes with him. "Officer, no one here is using Titan property. We are using my software on my laptops in my building. This is a contract dispute. It is a civil matter. And unless I am mistaken, filing a false police report to obtain a search warrant is a criminal offense." The officer dropped the warrant on the table as if it were burning his fingers. He looked at Elijah with pure disgust. "You told me she stole physical servers," the officer growled. "You told me she was fencing stolen goods. This is a business argument. We are not your private security force. But arrest her." Elijah screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Do your job. Let us go," the officer yelled to his men. "We are leaving." The police filed out as quickly as they had entered. The heavy door slammed shut, leaving Elijah standing alone in the center of the room. 52 people stared at him in silence. He looked small. He looked powerless. I picked up my coffee and took a sip. "Get out of my office, Elijah," I said, "before I call them back for trespassing." He glared at me, his eyes filled with hate, but he knew he was beaten. He turned and stormed out into the cold Chicago wind. I looked at my team. "Back to work, everyone," I said. "We have an empire to build." Simone sat on the edge of the master bed in her Buckhead mansion, her hands trembling as she held the piece of paper she had found crumpled in the pocket of Brad's blazer. It was a boarding pass. A one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands, departing tonight at 11 p.m. She stared at the name printed on it. Bradley Vance. Not even his real last name. He had taken her family name when they married, claiming it was an honor. Now it looked more like a disguise. The bedroom door opened and Brad walked in. He was carrying a duffel bag, hastily stuffing it with cash, watches, and jewelry. He froze when he saw Simone holding the ticket. His face, usually a mask of charming arrogance, went blank. "Going somewhere?" Simone asked, her voice shaking. "Without me?" Brad sighed, a sound of pure annoyance. He did not try to deny it. He did not try to make up a lie about a business trip. He just walked over to the dresser and swept her diamond earrings into his bag. "It is over, Simone," Brad said, not even looking at her. "The company is dead. Jada killed it. The feds will be here by morning. I am not going to prison for your father's incompetence." Simone stood up, her anger finally overriding her confusion. "My father made you," she screamed. "We gave you everything, this house, that car, your job. You were nothing before you met me. You were a barista with a fake resume." Brad stopped packing. He turned slowly to face her. His eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth she thought was love. He laughed, a cruel, cutting sound. "You really believed that, didn't you?" he sneered. "You actually thought I loved you. Look in the mirror, Simone. You are spoiled, vain, and not nearly as smart as you think you are. I did not marry you. I married the CEO position. I married the bank account." He zipped up the bag and slung it over his shoulder. "And now the account is empty, thanks to your sister-in-law." "So the ride is over." He moved toward the door. Simone lunged at him, grabbing his arm. "You cannot leave me," she shrieked. "I will call the police. I will tell them everything. I will tell them about the money you stole." Brad spun around and slapped her. It was a hard, backhanded strike that knocked her onto the bed. Simone gasped, clutching her cheek, staring up at him in shock. She had never seen this violence in him before. This was the real Brad. The mask had fallen off completely. "You will not tell anyone anything," Brad hissed, leaning over her. "Because if you do, I will tell them you helped me. I will tell them you signed the transfer orders. I forged your signature on enough documents to put you away for 20 years. He straightened his jacket, looking down at her with contempt. "Goodbye, Simone. Do not wait up." He walked out of the room, leaving her alone in the wreckage of her life. She listened to his footsteps fading down the hall, then the slam of the front door, and finally the roar of his car speeding away into the night. She lay on the expensive duvet, the silence of the empty house pressing down on her, realizing that Jada had been right about everything. The digital clock on my bedside table read 2:12 in the morning when the security system chimed. It was not the alarm. It was the motion sensor at the front gate. I rolled over and grabbed my tablet, tapping the app to bring up the live feed. The camera night vision washed the world in ghostly green and black, but the figure stumbling up my driveway was unmistakable. It was Julian. He was soaked to the bone, his expensive suit ruined by the Chicago rain, and he was swaying like a tree in a gale. I watched from the warmth of my bed as he reached the front door. He did not ring the bell. He pounded on the wood with his fist, a dull, rhythmic thudding that echoed through the quiet house. "Jada," he screamed, his voice slurred and broken. "Jada, open the door. I know you are in there." I did not get up. I did not go downstairs. I simply pressed the intercom button on my tablet. "Go home, Julian," I said, my voice calm and amplified through the speaker above his head. "You are drunk, and you are trespassing." He looked up at the camera, his face twisted in a mask of misery and rage. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hair was plastered to his forehead. "This is my home," he shouted. "You are my wife. You cannot lock me out. I have nowhere else to go." Tiana left me. Dad is not answering his phone. "I have nothing, Jada." "You should have thought about that before you helped your father fire me," I replied. "You should have thought about that before you spent our savings on a mistress." He sagged against the doorframe, sliding down until he was sitting on the wet concrete. He put his head in his hands and began to sob. It was a pathetic, ugly sound. "I am sorry," he wept. "I made a mistake. I was scared. Dad pressured me. I still love you, Jada. Please, just let me in. We can fix this. I will testify against Dad. I will do whatever you want. Just do not leave me out here." I watched him cry. A year ago, that sight would have broken my heart. Now I just felt a cold detachment. He did not love me. He loved the safety I provided. He loved the lifestyle I funded. He was not sorry he betrayed me. He was sorry he lost. "I sent the divorce papers to your email this morning, Julian," I said. "Sign them. Agree to the terms." Study. "Then maybe we can talk about a settlement. Until then, you are a stranger to me." The mention of the divorce papers snapped him out of his pity party. He stood up, his sorrow instantly replaced by a flash of violent anger. "Divorce," he spat. "You think you can just discard me. You think you are better than me because you can write code. You are nothing without the Vance name." He looked around, searching for something to hurt. His eyes landed on my G-Wagon parked in the driveway, the car I had bought with my own money, the symbol of my independence. He grabbed a heavy decorative stone from the garden border. "You want a war, Jada?" he screamed. "Fine!" He marched over to the car and swung the stone with all his might. It crashed into the driver's side window with a sickening crunch of shattering safety glass. He did not stop. He hit the door panel, denting the matte black finish. He hit the windshield. He was screaming incoherently, taking out his impotence on the machine. I did not call the police immediately. I watched. I let the cameras roll. I let him destroy property. I let him prove exactly who he was. Every blow was evidence. Every scream was a confession. When he finally dropped the rock, panting and exhausted, I pressed the save button on the recording. Thank you, Julian, I whispered to the empty room. You just gave me full custody and the house. Then I dialed 911. The marble floors of the First National Bank Private Wealth Division clicked sharply under my heels as I pushed Grandma Odessa's wheelchair toward the executive suite. We were not there to make a deposit. We were there to execute a hostile takeover of the family fortune. The branch manager, Mr. Sterling, hurried out to meet us. He looked pale. He knew exactly who Odessa Vance was. She was the name on the building's original charter. She was the reason the bank had the Titan Logistics account in the first place. Good morning, Mrs. Vance, Mr. Sterling said, bowing slightly. To what do we owe the honor? Odessa did not smile. She adjusted the blanket on her lap and looked him dead in the eye. Cut him off, she said. Her voice was not the raspy whisper of a sick woman. It was the command of a matriarch. Freeze every account linked to the Titan Trust. Freeze Elijah's personal assets. Freeze the credit lines. I am invoking the Founder's Clause. Mr. Sterling hesitated, glancing at me, then back at Odessa. But Mrs. Vance, that will paralyze the company operations. Elijah is a thief, Odessa interrupted. And you are aiding and abetting if you do not do as I say. Do it now, or I will move the entire portfolio to Chase within the hour. Mr. Sterling nodded, sweating. He turned to his computer and began typing. I watched as he hit the enter key. It was done. The financial lifeline was severed. Across town in the showroom of Bentley Gold Coast, Elijah was living in a different reality. He stood next to a gleaming silver Continental GT, running his hand along the leather upholstery. He needed a win. He needed to feel powerful again after the humiliation at the warehouse. He tossed his black Centurion card to the young salesman. Wrap it up, Elijah said arrogantly, and throw in the maintenance package. I do not have time for paperwork. The salesman caught the card and hurried to the desk. Elijah checked his reflection in the car window, adjusting his tie. He looked good. He looked like a CEO. 5 minutes later, the salesman returned. He was not smiling. He held the card with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. Mr. Vance, the salesman said loud enough for the other customers to hear. The card was declined. The terminal says to confiscate it. Elijah laughed. Do not be stupid. Run it again. It is an unlimited card. I cannot run it again, sir. The machine locked it out. It has been flagged for fraud. Elijah snatched the card back, his face flushing red. Fraud. He spat. I own the bank. He pulled out his phone and dialed the private concierge line for First National. He put it on speakerphone, screaming before anyone even answered. Sterling. What is the meaning of this? My card is not working. Fix it, or you are fired. There was a click on the line. But it was not Mr. Sterling's voice that answered. It was a voice Elijah had not heard with clarity in years. A voice he thought he had silenced in a nursing home. Hello, Elijah. Elijah froze. The phone slipped slightly in his sweaty grip. Mama, he whispered. I am not dead yet, son. Odessa said, her voice amplified through the quiet showroom. And as long as I am breathing, you do not spend another dime of my money. You are cut off, Elijah. You are broke. The line went dead. Elijah stood there, the silence of the dealership pressing in on him, realizing that the car, the status, and the power were all just smoke, and he was the one choking on it. Thursday morning was supposed to be payday. For 3,000 truck drivers across the Midwest, it was the day the rent was due and the groceries were bought. But when the clock struck 9, the direct deposit notifications did not come. Instead, phones started buzzing with insufficient funds alerts. Brad had drained the payroll account to pay off Mr. Volkov, and he had done it believing he could fix it before anyone noticed. He was wrong. You cannot hide a missing paycheck from a man who drives 18 hours a day to feed his family. At the massive Titan distribution center in Joliet, the engines stopped. It was not a gradual slowdown. It was a simultaneous, coordinated shutdown. One by one, the drivers pulled their rigs across the exit gates, engaging the air brakes with a hiss that sounded like a collective sigh of rage. They climbed out of their cabs not to work, but to wait. They formed a wall of steel and chrome that blocked everything. Nothing went in, nothing came out. I watched the aerial footage on the news monitors in my war room. The line of stationary trucks stretched for miles down the highway. It looked like a parking lot. But the real disaster was happening inside the trailers. That is, fresh foods inventory, Sarah said, pointing to a line of refrigerated trucks near the front of the blockade. The reefer units are off. They are out of fuel. I nodded grimly. The drivers were not wasting their own money on diesel to keep the cooling units running for a company that had stiffed them. Inside those trailers, tons of premium seafood and organic produce were beginning to thaw. The smell of rotting fish and spoiling fruit would soon hang over the industrial park like a miasma of failure. It was the smell of Elijah's legacy decomposing in the sun. The news anchors were having a field day. Every channel had a reporter standing in front of the blockade. The chyrons at the bottom of the screen screamed in bold red letters, "Titan Empire collapses. Employees strike. CEO missing." The reporter on Channel 5 was interviewing a driver named Big Mike. Mike was holding his empty wallet up to the camera, his face red with fury. "We drove the miles," Mike shouted into the microphone. "We delivered the goods, and they robbed us. Brad Vance stole our money. We are not moving these trucks until we get paid. And if Brad shows his face down here, he is going to need a lot more than a security detail." The camera panned back to the reporter. "You heard it here first," the reporter said gravely. "Allegations of massive embezzlement are swirling around the new leadership of Titan Logistics. We have reached out to Elijah Vance for comment, but his office is empty. We have reached out to Brad Vance, but his phone is disconnected. The Titan is falling, and there is no one at the wheel." I muted the TV. The silence in the war room was respectful. We had won, but it was a heavy victory. We had exposed the rot, but seeing the actual destruction was sobering. "Call the union representative for the drivers," I told Marcus. "Tell them King Logistics is hiring. Tell them I will cover their missing payroll if they sign with us today. And tell them to turn the reefer units back on. I am not letting that food go to waste." Marcus smiled and picked up the phone. The Titan fleet was dead, but my fleet was just waking up. The Black Enterprise Gala was the single most important night on the Chicago social calendar. It was where deals were struck over champagne and legacies were cemented under the glow of crystal chandeliers. For 30 years, Elijah Vance had walked the red carpet as a king. He was a founding sponsor. He always sat at table 1. Tonight he arrived in a taxi because his Bentley was impounded. He smoothed the lapels of his tuxedo, trying to rub away the wrinkles of desperation. He needed to be seen. He needed to shake hands and pretend that Titan Logistics was not burning to the ground. If he could just secure one investor, he could turn the tide. He marched up to the velvet rope, his chin held high in a fragile imitation of confidence. The flashbulbs were popping, but they were not for him. The photographers were looking past him, waiting for someone who actually mattered. Elijah reached the entrance where a formidable man with an earpiece held a digital tablet. "Good evening," Elijah said, breezing forward. "Elijah Vance, I am at table 1. The security guard did not move. He did not step aside. He looked down at the tablet, then back up at Elijah with a look of professional indifference. "I am sorry, sir," the guard said. "Your name is not on the guest list." Elijah laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. "Do not be ridiculous. I am a platinum sponsor. I have had table 1 since 1995. Check it again." "I did check it, sir." The guard replied, his voice raising slightly to be heard over the crowd. "The sponsorship was cancelled due to non-payment. Table 1 was resold yesterday." "Non-payment," Elijah sputtered. "That is a banking error. My mother froze the accounts by mistake. It is being resolved. Let me in. I need to speak to the organizers. Please step aside, sir. You are blocking the entrance." "Block the entrance," Elijah shouted, his composure shattering. "I built this event. Do you know who I am? I am Titan Logistics." "You are trespassing," the guard said, placing a heavy hand on Elijah's chest. "Step back now or you will be removed." Before Elijah could scream again, a hush fell over the crowd, followed immediately by a roar of excitement. A sleek phantom black Rolls-Royce pulled up to the curb. The paparazzi went wild. The rear door opened, and I stepped out. I was wearing a gown of shimmering gold that looked like armor made of light. I did not look like a woman who had been fired. I looked like a woman who had just conquered a kingdom. The gala organizer, a woman named Mrs. Dubois, who had ignored Elijah's calls for a week, rushed down the stairs to greet me. "Jada, darling," Mrs. Dubois gushed, taking my hands. "You look magnificent. We are so honored to have the CEO of King Logistics here tonight. Everyone is dying to meet you." I smiled at her, the flashbulbs blinding me. "Thank you. It is a new era." I walked up the red carpet, the crowd parting for me like the Red Sea. I saw Elijah standing behind the velvet rope pushed back into the shadows by the security team. He looked small. He looked old. He looked like a beggar watching a queen take the throne. He lunged forward, his face twisted with hate. "That is my table!" Elijah screamed, reaching for me over the rope. "She stole it from me. She is a thief!" Security moved instantly. Two guards grabbed Elijah by the arms, dragging him back. He kicked and shouted, a spectacle of fallen grace. "Jada, tell them." Elijah pleaded, his voice cracking. "Tell them who I am." I stopped and looked at him. I looked at the man who had terrorized me for a decade. "I do not know that man," I said to the head of security. "Keep him away from me." I turned my back on him and walked into the warmth of the gala, leaving Elijah Vance screaming in the cold. While Elijah was being dragged away from the red carpet at the gala, Brad was standing in line at the international terminal of O'Hare Airport. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes and a hoodie that cost $500, but looked like he picked it up at a thrift store. He was sweating. He kept checking his phone, not for messages, but to see if the news had broken yet. He clutched the handle of his duffel bag so tightly his knuckles were white. Inside that bag was $200,000 in cash and enough jewelry to start a pawn shop. He was 5 minutes away from freedom, 5 minutes away from a beach where the FBI could not touch him. He stepped up to the first-class check-in counter. He tried to smile at the agent, but it looked more like a grimace of pain. "One way to Grand Cayman," he said, sliding his passport across the counter. "No checked bags, just me and the carry-on." The agent, a young woman with a tired smile, took the passport. She scanned it. Then she stopped. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She looked at the screen, then she looked up at Brad. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of professional concern. "Is there a problem?" Brad asked, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Just a system flag, sir," the agent said, reaching for the phone. "I need to verify the payment method." Brad felt a surge of adrenaline. "No, do not call anyone. Here I will pay cash. Just give me the boarding pass." He reached into his pocket to pull out a roll of bills, but a hand clamped down on his shoulder. It was heavy and firm. Brad froze. He turned his head slowly. Standing behind him were 4 men in dark suits. They were not airport security. They were not local police. They had the cold, hard look of federal agents. Bradley Vance, the lead agent, said, holding up a badge. "I am Special Agent Miller with the FBI. You are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement." Brad tried to run. It was a stupid instinct born of pure terror. He dropped the bag and lunged to the left, but he did not make it 2 steps. The agents tackled him, slamming him face first into the polished floor of the terminal. The sound of his breath leaving his lungs was audible over the gasp of the crowd. "Get off me!" Brad screamed as they wrenched his arms behind his back. "You have the wrong person. I am the CEO of Titan Logistics." "Not anymore," the agent said, clicking the handcuffs onto Brad's wrists. "We have the transfer logs, Brad. We tracked the $500,000 you wired this morning. And we have the witness statement from Jada King." Brad was hauled to his feet. He looked around wildly at the passengers staring at him, filming him with their phones. He saw his life ending. He saw the prison cell waiting for him. And in that moment, his loyalty to the Vance family evaporated completely. It was not me, Brad shrieked, his voice cracking with hysteria. It was Simone. It was my wife. She made me do it. She signed the transfer orders. She wanted the money. I was just following orders. Arrest her. She is the one you want. The agents ignored him, dragging him toward the exit. But the cameras caught every word. Brad was not just going down. He was taking the entire family with him. The 60-inch ultra-high-definition television mounted above the fireplace was the last thing in the room that felt real. Simone sat on the edge of her beige linen sofa, a glass of lukewarm Chardonnay, trembling in her hand, staring at the screen. The breaking news banner was a bright angry red. FBI arrests tech executive at O'Hare. Below the headline, the footage played on a loop. It was shaky cell phone video, but the face was unmistakable. It was Brad. He was being dragged through the terminal in handcuffs, his expensive hoodie bunched up around his neck. But it was the audio that made Simone's blood turn to ice. Over the noise of the airport, Brad's voice was clear and shrill. It was Simone. It was my wife. She made me do it. She signed the transfer orders. The glass slipped from her fingers and bounced on the rug, spilling wine like a dark stain spreading across her life. He had sold her out. The man she had elevated, the man she had defended against her own family, was trying to send her to prison to save his own skin. She grabbed the remote to turn it off to silence his betrayal. But before she could press the button, a thunderous pounding shook the front door. It was not a polite knock. It was the heavy, authoritative demand of people who had the law on their side. Simone froze. She stood up, her legs feeling like lead, and walked to the foyer. She peered through the peephole. Standing on her porch were 3 large men in jumpsuits and a woman holding a clipboard. Behind them, a massive moving truck was backing into her driveway, its backup alarm beeping a steady rhythm of doom. She opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice small. "Mrs. Vance?" the woman asked, not looking up from her clipboard. "We are here on behalf of the creditors' union. We have a writ of replevin for the contents of this residence, due to default on the secured loans held by Bradley Vance. We are clearing the house." "You cannot do that," Simone stammered, trying to block the doorway. "This is my house. These are my things." The woman finally looked up. Her eyes were tired. "Ma'am, the loans were secured against the household assets. Your husband signed the paperwork. Please step aside or we will call the sheriff to assist with the eviction." The men did not wait for an invitation. They pushed past her, their boots muddying the marble floor. One of them walked straight to the living room and unhooked the giant TV from the wall. Another started grabbing the antique vases. They moved with the efficiency of locusts. Simone watched as her life was dismantled piece by piece. Her status, her comfort, her identity, it was all being boxed up and carried away. She fumbled for her phone. She dialed her father, but it went straight to voicemail. She dialed Brad, but the number was disconnected. She was alone in a house that was being eaten alive. Desperation clawed at her throat. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the one number she swore she would never call. Jada. She pressed call. The ringtone sounded like a lifeline. 1 ring, 2, then a click. "Hello?" Jada's voice was cool, distant, like she was speaking from another planet. "Jada, help me." Simone sobbed, collapsing onto the bottom step of her grand staircase as a mover carried her dining chairs past her. "They are taking everything. Brad got arrested and he is blaming me. The repo men are here. Please, Jada, you have to stop them. We are family. I am your sister." There was a pause on the other end. A long, heavy silence where Simone could hear the faint sound of jazz music playing in the background of Jada's world. "I am sorry," Jada said, her voice devoid of anger, devoid of pity, devoid of anything at all. "You must have dialed the wrong number. I do not have a sister." The line went dead. Simone pulled the phone away from her ear and stared at the black screen. The finality of the click echoed in her mind, louder than the movers, louder than the news report, louder than the crashing of her world. She was not just broke. She was an orphan. The glass doors of Apex Freight, the fiercest competitor to what remained of Titan Logistics, slid open with a smooth, welcoming hiss. Julian straightened his tie in the reflection. It was an Armani tie, one of the few luxury items he had managed to salvage from the penthouse before the locks were changed. He smoothed his hair, put on his best executive smile, and walked up to the reception desk. He needed this. He needed a salary. He needed to prove to Jada, to his father, and to himself that he was more than just a name. He was Julian Vance, and he had value. He was ushered into the corner office of Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Apex. Thorne was a shark in a pinstripe suit, known for eating smaller companies for breakfast. He sat behind a desk that looked like it was carved from a single block of obsidian. He did not stand up. He did not offer a hand. He just stared at Julian over the top of a printed resume. "Mr. Vance," Thorne said, his voice a low rumble. "Please sit." Julian sat, trying to look comfortable in the leather chair. "Thank you for seeing me, Marcus." Julian began, leaning forward earnestly. "I know the timing is unusual, given the situation at Titan, but I believe my experience could be a significant asset to Apex. I know the Titan playbook inside and out. I know their client list. I know their margins. I can bring that institutional knowledge to your team." Thorne dropped the resume onto the desk. He leaned back, lacing his fingers together. "Institutional knowledge." Thorne repeated, testing the words. "That is an interesting way to phrase it. Tell me, Julian, if you know the Titan playbook so well, why is your family company currently being liquidated by the federal government?" Julian flinched. He had hoped to avoid the specifics of the collapse. "That was a management issue," Julian said quickly. "My brother-in-law made some poor decisions. My father was distracted. But I ran the accounts. I managed the relationships." Thorne laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You managed the relationships?" Thorne asked. "Is that why you are currently being sued for divorce by the woman who actually ran the company?" Julian froze. The smile slid off his face. "My personal life is separate from my professional capabilities," Julian said stiffly. "Is it?" Thorne countered. "Because from where I am sitting, your personal life destroyed your professional credibility. I did not bring you in here to hire you, Julian. I brought you in here because I wanted to see him." "See who?" Julian asked, confused. "The man who fumbled the bag." Thorne said, his eyes hard and mocking. "You were married to Jada King, the most brilliant logistician of her generation. She built a billion-dollar infrastructure while you were busy playing golf and spending her bonuses. You had the golden goose and you cooked her for dinner because your daddy told you to." Thorne stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "I am currently in negotiations with King Logistics to license her software," Thorne said without turning around. "If I hired you, Jada would never sign that contract. She would burn my company down just like she burned yours. You are radioactive, Julian. You are the punchline to the biggest joke in the industry. No one in this town will hire Jada King's ex-husband. We are all too afraid of her." Julian stood up, his face burning with humiliation. "I have an MBA," Julian shouted, his voice cracking. "I am a Vance." Thorne turned back, his face devoid of sympathy. "You are a liability," Thorne said. "Security will show you out. Try the temp agency down the street. I hear they are looking for people who can lift heavy boxes." Julian walked out of the office, the laughter of the Apex staff following him down the hallway. He stepped onto the sidewalk, loosened his Armani tie, and realized for the first time that the name Vance was no longer a key that opened doors. It was a lock that kept them shut. The Cook County Correctional Center did not have a VIP entrance. Elijah Vance discovered this indignity as he stood in the slow-moving security line, sandwiched between a weeping mother and a man with face tattoos. He had to take off his belt. He had to remove his Italian leather shoes. He had to surrender his phone. By the time he reached the visitor area, he was stripped of every accoutrement of power he had spent a lifetime accumulating. He sat on the metal stool in front of the thick plexiglass partition, his leg bouncing with a mixture of rage and adrenaline. Brad was led in by two guards. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. His hair was unwashed and he looked like he had not slept in days. But when he saw Elijah, he did not look ashamed. He did not look afraid. He smiled. It was a jagged, broken smile that made the hair on Elijah's arms stand up. Brad picked up the receiver and held it to his ear. Elijah snatched up his own phone, his knuckles white. "You ungrateful parasite," Elijah hissed into the phone. "You stole from me. You stole from my mother. I took you in. I gave you a life you never deserved, and you repay me by looting my company." Brad just kept smiling. He leaned forward until his forehead was resting against the glass. His breath fogged the surface. "I did not loot it alone. Dad," Brad said, his voice sounding tinny and distorted through the receiver. "Do not call me Dad." Elijah spat. "You are nothing to me. I am going to make sure you rot in here. I have the best lawyers in the city working on my defense. I am going to pin every single missing cent on you. You acted alone. You are a rogue employee." Brad laughed. It was a wet, hacking sound that turned into a cough. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Rogue employee," Brad repeated. "Is that the story?" "That is funny. Because that is not what I told the FBI this morning." Elijah froze. The blood began to pound in his ears. "What did you say?" Elijah whispered. "I told them the truth." Brad said, his eyes wide and manic. "I told them I was just the executioner. You were the judge. Do you remember those digital transfer authorizations, Elijah? The ones you approved every Friday morning without reading them because you were too busy playing golf." Elijah felt a cold hand squeeze his heart. "I never signed those transfer orders," Elijah stammered. "Your digital key did," Brad countered. "Your biometric fingerprint is on every single wire transfer to the Cayman Islands. I made sure of it. I set it up so that every theft required your direct override. You thought you were approving vendor payments. You were approving my retirement fund, and you know what the feds call that. They call it conspiracy. They call it a RICO case. You are lying." Elijah gasped, his chest tightening. "I cut a deal, Elijah." Brad said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I gave them everything. The logs, the emails, the recordings of you telling me to do whatever it took to hide the losses. I am going to do 5 years in minimum security. You are going to die in a cage. You are the CEO, Elijah. The captain goes down with the ship." The room began to spin. Elijah dropped the receiver. It swung on its metal cord, banging against the wall. He tried to stand up, but his legs would not support him. A crushing weight slammed into his chest, like an anvil dropped from the ceiling. He gasped for air, but there was none. He clawed at his tie, trying to loosen the noose around his neck. Guard Brad shouted from behind the glass, laughing as he pointed. "Watch out! The old man is tipping over." Elijah fell. He hit the linoleum floor hard. His vision tunneled into darkness. The last thing he saw was Brad's orange jumpsuit and that terrible, triumphant smile floating above him as the darkness swallowed him whole. The conference room at First National Bank smelled of stale coffee and desperation. The bank executives sat on one side of the long oak table, looking at the pile of foreclosure documents that represented the corpse of Titan Logistics. Across from them sat the vultures. Representatives from Apex Freight and other competitors were there, hoping to pick the carcass clean. They wanted the trucks. They wanted the distribution centers. But they were all hesitating. They looked at me sitting at the head of the table, and they knew the truth. Buying Titan assets without my software was like buying a Ferrari with no engine. It looked pretty, but it was not going anywhere. Mr. Sterling, the bank manager who had frozen Elijah's accounts, cleared his throat. He looked tired. Dealing with the Vance family implosion had likely aged him 10 years. "We are accepting sealed bids for the entire portfolio," Sterling announced, his voice echoing in the quiet room. This includes the fleet of 3,000 semi-trucks, the Joliet distribution hub, and the headquarters tower at One Titan Way. The opening assessment is valued at $80 million. Silence filled the room. 80 million was a fantasy. The brand was toxic. The drivers were on strike. The software was bricked. Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Apex Freight, leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. He looked at me and gave a small, respectful nod. He closed his folder. He was not bidding. He knew better. One by one, the other competitors followed suit. They knew that if they bought the hardware, I would sue them for intellectual property infringement the moment they tried to boot up a computer. Sterling looked around the room, sweat beading on his forehead. "Do we have an opening bid?" Sterling asked, his voice tight. I waited. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. I let them feel the weight of the disaster Elijah had created. Then I leaned forward and placed a single sheet of paper on the table. $10 million, I said, my voice calm and absolute. Sterling choked. He looked at the paper, then at me. "Ms. King, that is insulting," Sterling sputtered. "The real estate alone is appraised at 40 million. The trucks are worth another 20 in scrap metal. We cannot accept 10 million. I stood up. I walked over to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. I could see the Titan Tower in the distance, dark and empty. "The real estate is leveraged to the hilt, Sterling," I countered, turning back to face him. "The building has a lien from the city for unpaid property taxes. The trucks have been sitting idle for 2 weeks, which means the maintenance costs are skyrocketing and the tires are rotting. And the brand, the name Titan Logistics, is synonymous with fraud and failure. You are not selling a company. You are selling a crime scene." I walked back to the table and tapped the paper. $10 million. Cash. Today, I said. "That clears the bank bad debt. It saves you the embarrassment of a public auction where no one shows up, and it guarantees that the 3,000 drivers get their jobs back tomorrow, or you can hold on to it and watch the value drop to zero while the buildings crumble." Sterling looked at the other bidders. They were all packing up their briefcases. He looked at his colleagues. They nodded grimly. The bank just wanted out. They wanted to wash their hands of the Vance family forever. "Sold," Sterling whispered. "Sold to King Logistics for $10 million. I sat down and signed the papers. My signature was bold and unhesitating. Jada King. It looked good on the deed. Sterling handed me a heavy ring of keys. They were the master keys. The keys to the front door. The keys to the executive elevator. The keys to the office where Elijah had fired me 10 days ago. I walked out of the bank into the bright Chicago sunlight. I held the keys in my hand. They felt heavy, but it was a good weight. It was the weight of ownership. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. "Pack your bags, Marcus," I said, a smile breaking across my face. "We are moving back in, but call the sign company first. I want the name Vance scraped off the building before I get there. It is King Tower now." The fluorescent lights of the Cook County family court were unflattering, washing out the faces of everyone in the room. But Julian looked particularly ghostly. He sat at the plaintiff's table, drumming his fingers nervously on the wood. His lawyer was a disheveled man in an ill-fitting suit, a far cry from the high-powered legal teams the Vance family used to command. I sat on the other side, flanked by my attorney Olivia, a woman who billed more per hour than Julian had made in the last year. I wore a white power suit, immaculate and sharp. I was not there to negotiate. I was there to spectate his final defeat. "Your Honor." Julian's lawyer began, his voice whiny and grating. "My client is seeking an equitable distribution of marital assets. Specifically, we are claiming 50% ownership of King Logistics and the newly acquired Titan assets. Mrs. King built this company during the marriage, utilizing connections and intellectual property developed while she was supported by Mr. Vance. It is community property." I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Supported by him. That was rich. Julian had not paid a bill since 2015. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked over her spectacles at Julian. Mr. Vance, she said, you are claiming half of a company your wife started after you conspired to have her fired from her previous job. Is that correct? It is the law, Julian blurted out, leaning forward. We are married. What is hers is mine. She locked me out of our accounts, Your Honor. She left me destitute. I helped build that lifestyle. I deserve my share. Olivia stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She simply slid a thick binder across the bench to the judge. Your Honor, Olivia said calmly, Mr. Vance seems to have forgotten the prenuptial agreement he signed 10 years ago, specifically Article 4, Section 2, the Fidelity and Dissipation Clause. Julian froze. I saw the color drain from his face as he remembered the document he had signed without reading because he was too busy planning his bachelor party. Article 4 states that if either party engages in extramarital affairs or dissipates marital assets for non-marital purposes, they forfeit all claims to the other party's separate property and any alimony, Olivia continued. That is irrelevant, Julian shouted, standing up. I never cheated. She is making that up. Olivia opened her own copy of the binder. Exhibit A, she read. Hotel receipts from the Peninsula, Chicago, dated 3 months ago. The room was booked under Mr. Vance's name, but room service was ordered for 2. Champagne and oysters. Exhibit B, a credit card statement showing a purchase of a diamond tennis bracelet from Tiffany & Company valued at $12,000. This item was not gifted to my client. It was seen on the wrist of a Ms. Tiana Banks in an Instagram story posted the same weekend as the hotel stay. Olivia pulled up a tablet and played the video. Tiana's voice chirped through the courtroom, thanking her daddy Julian for the bling. The judge watched the video. Then she looked at the receipts. Then she looked at Julian, who was now sweating profusely. Mr. Vance, the judge, said, her voice icy. Did you spend $12,000 of marital funds on a woman who is not your wife? Julian stammered. We were on a break. It was a consulting fee. She is a business associate. A business associate you took to a hotel for the weekend, the judge deadpanned. And there is more, Your Honor, Olivia added. Exhibit C, security footage from the night of October 15th. She played the video of Julian smashing my G-Wagon with a rock. The sound of shattering glass filled the courtroom. Destruction of property, domestic intimidation, and misuse of family funds, Olivia summarized. Mr. Vance has not only violated the prenup, he has proven himself to be a liability to the marital estate. We are asking for a full dismissal of his claims and for him to assume the entirety of his personal debts. The judge slammed her gavel. It sounded like the final nail in a coffin. Motion granted, the judge ruled. The prenuptial agreement is valid and enforceable. Mr. Vance, you get nothing. Julian slumped into his chair, staring at the table. He had walked in expecting a payday. He was walking out with nothing but his own reflection to blame. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a commanding thud that silenced the room instantly. Julian twisted in his chair, a look of irritation crossing his face, expecting to see a late arrival from the press, or perhaps one of his father's cronies coming to offer moral support. Instead, the color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. Rolling down the center aisle was Grandma Odessa. She was in a wheelchair pushed by Marcus, but she sat with the posture of a queen returning from exile. She wore a pristine white suit and a hat with a small veil, her eyes sharp and clear behind her glasses. Your Honor? Olivia announced, her voice ringing with triumph. The defense calls Ms. Odessa Vance to the stand. Julian jumped to his feet, knocking his chair over with a loud clatter. Objection! Julian shouted, his voice shrill with panic. She is not competent. She has dementia. My father has a medical proxy. She does not know where she is. The judge banged her gavel. Sit down, Mr. Vance, the judge ordered. If she is incompetent, the court will make that determination. Not you. Odessa was wheeled to the witness stand. She took the oath with a steady voice that reached the back of the room. She adjusted the microphone and looked directly at her grandson. There was no love in her eyes today, only justice. Ms. Vance Olivia began gently. Can you tell the court how your son Elijah and your grandson Julian obtained control of your voting shares in Titan Logistics 5 years ago? Odessa nodded. They told me I was signing insurance forms for my hip surgery. Odessa said, her words crisp and precise. I was on heavy pain medication. I was vulnerable. Julian came to my hospital room. He brought me flowers. He held my hand. He told me he loved me, and that he just wanted to make sure his grandma was taken care of. A gasp ran through the gallery. Julian gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. And what were you actually signing, Ms. Vance? Olivia asked. I was signing away my life. Odessa replied, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. It was a durable power of attorney and a transfer of stock voting rights. They slipped the pages in between the medical forms. Julian held the pen for me. He guided my hand. He looked me in the eye and smiled while he stole my company. Lies. Julian screamed. That is a lie. She is confused. The judge turned her gaze on Julian. It was a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. It was the look one gives to something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. Mr. Vance, one more outburst, and I will have you gagged, the judge warned. Odessa continued, her eyes never leaving Julian's face. I am not confused, Julian. I remember everything. I remember you laughing in the hallway with your father after you left my room. I remember you saying the old bat is finally out of the way. You did not just steal my money. You stole my dignity. You locked me in a home and threw away the key so you could play executive with your father. She pointed a shaking finger at him. But you forgot one thing, grandson. I built that company from the dirt up, and I know how to bury trash. The judge looked at the documents Olivia had entered into evidence. The handwriting on the transfer forms was shaky, clearly written by someone under duress or influence. The signature on the power of attorney Jada had obtained last week was bold and firm. The witness is clearly credible, the judge stated, closing the file, and the testimony establishes a pattern of predatory behavior by the plaintiff. Julian sank back into his chair. He looked small. He looked defeated. He had spent his life hiding behind his father and his privilege, but there was nowhere to hide from the truth when it was spoken by the woman who gave him his name. The courtroom felt smaller, the walls closing in on him as the weight of his betrayal finally crushed him. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked down at the court reporter to ensure every word was being captured. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Julian was still slumped in his chair, his lawyer packing up his briefcase with the speed of someone who knew the billable hours were over and the outcome was a foregone conclusion. I sat up straight, my hands folded on the table, feeling the cool metal of my pen against my skin. It was the only thing grounding me. In the matter of Vance versus King, the judge began, her voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. The court finds in favor of the respondent, Jada King. The prenuptial agreement is upheld in its entirety. The plaintiff, Mr. Vance, has failed to demonstrate any claim to the marital assets or the separate property of Ms. King. Furthermore, due to the proven dissipation of marital funds for extramarital activities, Mr. Vance is ordered to assume full responsibility for all outstanding debts listed in Exhibit D, including the credit card balances totaling $250,000. Julian made a sound like a wounded animal. $250,000. It was a debt he could never repay. He had no job. He had no assets. He had no father to bail him out. He was destitute. The divorce is granted, the judge concluded, banging her gavel. Court is adjourned. I stood up. Olivia gave me a small professional nod. It was over. I was free. I turned to leave, ready to walk out into the rest of my life. Jada, wait. Julian scrambled out of his chair. He rushed around the table, ignoring the bailiff who took a step toward him. He fell to his knees in the middle of the aisle, blocking my path. He grabbed the hem of my pants, his hands shaking. Please, Jada. Julian sobbed, tears streaming down his face, ruining his expensive shirt. You cannot do this. I have nothing. Dad is broke. Brad is in jail. I have nowhere to go. I will be homeless. I looked down at him. I remembered the man who had bought me flowers on our first date. I remembered the man who had promised to build a life with me. But that man was gone. He had been replaced by this pathetic creature who only knew how to take. "Let go of me, Julian," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Just give me something. Anything," Julian pleaded, tightening his grip. "A loan. A job. I will work in the mailroom. I will drive a truck. Just do not leave me with nothing." I looked at the hand clutching my leg. It was the same hand that had signed the transfer orders, the same hand that had thrown a rock through my car window. "You did this to yourself," I said. "You chose your father over your wife. You chose a mistress over your marriage. You chose greed over loyalty. Now you have to live with those choices." I pulled my leg free from his grasp. He fell forward onto the carpet, weeping openly. The gallery watched in uncomfortable silence. I stepped over him. I did not kick him. I did not spit on him. I simply walked over him as if he were a puddle on the sidewalk. I walked down the aisle past Grandma Odessa, who gave me a proud smile, past Marcus, who held the door open for me. I walked out of the courtroom and I did not look back. Not even once. The private suite on the cardiac floor of Northwestern Memorial Hospital was quiet, except for the rhythmic beeping of the EKG monitor. Elijah Vance lay in the bed, propped up by pillows. He was wearing a thin cotton hospital gown that felt rough against his skin. It was a humiliating shade of blue. He stared at the ceiling, counting the tiles, trying to ignore the dull ache in his chest. He told himself it was just stress. He told himself that by Monday, he would be back in the office. He would fire the board. He would sue Jada. He would fix everything. He was Elijah Vance. He was untouchable. The door to his room swung open. Elijah did not turn his head. He assumed it was the nurse coming to check his vitals or bring him water. "Get out!" Elijah rasped, his voice weak but filled with his trademark arrogance. "I told the station nurse I do not want to be disturbed. I am trying to sleep." "We are not the nurse, Mr. Vance," a deep voice said. Elijah turned his head slowly. Standing at the foot of his bed were two men in dark suits. They were not doctors. They were not friends. They were the same federal agents who had arrested Brad at the airport. Agent Miller stood tall, holding a leather folder. "Elijah Vance," Agent Miller said, his voice filling the sterile room. "I am placing you under arrest for racketeering, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering." Elijah tried to sit up, but the wires attached to his chest pulled him back. The monitor began to beep faster, reflecting the spike in his heart rate. "You cannot arrest me here," Elijah sputtered, his face flushing red. "I am a sick man. I am in cardiac recovery. This is harassment. Get my lawyer on the phone immediately." "Your lawyer is already aware of the situation," Agent Miller said, stepping closer to the bed. "And so is your doctor. We have a medical transport team waiting outside. Once you are stable, you will be transferred to the secure ward at the Federal Detention Center." The detention center. The words hit Elijah like a physical blow. "This is a mistake," Elijah insisted, his hands gripping the bedsheets. "It was Brad. My son-in-law did this. He is the thief. He is lying to save himself. You cannot believe him. He is a gambling addict." "We know about the gambling, Mr. Vance," Agent Miller said calmly. "But we also know about the authorization codes. Brad gave us the server logs. He gave us the audio recordings from your office where you instructed him to falsify the quarterly reports. We have you on tape, Elijah. We have everything." The agent reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. He did not secure them to Elijah's wrists. Instead, he clicked one cuff onto Elijah's right wrist and the other onto the metal rail of the hospital bed. The sound of the metal locking was final and absolute. Elijah looked at the handcuff. It was cold against his skin. He looked at the agent. For the first time in 40 years, Elijah Vance had nothing to say. He had no threats. He had no bribes. He had no power. Agent Miller pulled a small card from his pocket and began to read. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Elijah closed his eyes as the rights were read to him. He listened to the steady beep of the monitor, realizing that it was counting down the seconds of his freedom. The empire was gone. The family was destroyed, and he was just an old man chained to a bed waiting to die in a cage. The smell of stale fryer grease was the first thing that hit Simone as she pushed open the sticky glass door of Burger Bliss. It was a thick, suffocating scent that clung to her hair instantly. She was wearing a silk blouse that cost $600, but it was wrinkled and stained with coffee from where she had slept in her car the night before. She clutched her Prada handbag, which was now empty except for a tube of lipstick and a bus pass. She was not here to order a meal. She was here because the help wanted sign in the window was the only invitation she had received in weeks. She walked up to the counter. The teenager working the register popped a bubble of gum and looked at her with dull disinterest. "I am here to see the manager," Simone said, trying to pitch her voice to the haughty tone she used to command. "I am applying for the shift supervisor position." The teenager rolled his eyes and yelled toward the back. "Hey, Brenda! Some lady in a fancy shirt wants a job." A moment later, the kitchen door swung open. A woman in a polyester uniform with a name tag that read General Manager walked out. She was wiping her hands on a towel. She looked tired, but her eyes were sharp. She stopped when she saw Simone. A slow, unrecognizable expression spread across her face. It was not a smile. It was something colder. "Simone Vance," the manager said softly. Simone blinked. She squinted at the woman. She looked familiar in a vague, invisible sort of way, like someone Simone might have walked past 1,000 times without seeing. "Yes, that is me," Simone said, straightening her spine. "Have we met?" The manager laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. "You could say that. I worked at Titan Logistics for 3 years, Simone. I was the receptionist on the executive floor. The one you fired because I didn't hold the elevator door open for you fast enough. You told your father I had an attitude problem. You said I was looking at you disrespectfully." Simone felt the blood drain from her face. She remembered. She remembered the girl crying as security escorted her out. She remembered laughing about it with Brad over lunch. Brenda Simone stammered, her voice trembling. "I am so sorry. I did not know. I was under a lot of stress back then. Please, I really need this job. I have nothing left. My husband is in jail. My house is gone. I just need a chance." Brenda crossed her arms and leaned against the counter. She looked Simone up and down, taking in the ruined blouse and the desperate eyes. "You want a job?" Brenda asked. "You want to be a part of the team?" "Yes," Simone pleaded. "I can manage people. I have leadership skills. I can run the register." Brenda shook her head. "No, Simone. You do not get to run the register. You do not get to manage anyone. But I am going to hire you." Simone felt a surge of relief so strong she almost collapsed. "Thank you. Thank you so much, Brenda. I will not let you down." "When do I start?" "You start right now," Brenda said, reaching behind the counter. She pulled out a bucket of dirty gray water and a mop that looked like it had seen a war zone. She dropped them in front of Simone with a wet splash. "The men's restroom has a clog in the second stall," Brenda said, her voice devoid of pity. "Someone got sick in there an hour ago, and I have been waiting for the right person to clean it up. That person is you." Simone stared at the bucket. The smell coming from it was foul. "You want me to clean the toilet?" Simone whispered, horrified. Brenda smiled. "And the floor. And the walls. If you want the minimum wage paycheck, you do the minimum wage work. Now get scrubbing, princess, or get out." Simone looked at the door. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream, but her stomach growled, a painful reminder of her hunger. She slowly reached down and picked up the mop handle. It was slimy. She walked toward this bathroom, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, knowing that she had finally hit rock bottom. The revolving doors spun with a smooth whisper, admitting me into the lobby of what was now officially King Tower. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and new beginnings. I walked across the polished marble floor, the sound of my heels echoing against the high ceiling. I stopped dead in the center of the room. Looming over the reception desk was the 10-foot oil painting of Elijah Vance. He was painted in a heroic pose, staring down at the employees with a sneer of eternal judgment. It was a shrine to a false god. Two maintenance workers stood nearby, holding ladders, waiting for my command. They looked nervous. "Take it down," I said, my voice echoing in the vast space. "Burn it or throw it in the dumpster. I do not care. Just get it out of my sight." The workers scrambled. They unhooked the heavy frame and lowered Elijah to the floor face down. The wall looked better already. It looked clean. "Bring in the new one," I ordered. Marcus walked in carrying a large framed photograph. It was black and white, sharp and dignified. It showed a young Odessa Vance standing proudly in front of her very first delivery truck, wearing overalls and a smile that could light up a city. "Hang it high," I said, watching them lift the frame. "Let everyone who walks in here know who really built this house." "Welcome home, Grandma." The prison visiting room smelled of bleach and misery. Elijah sat behind the thick plexiglass partition, wearing a jumpsuit that matched the color of the sunset he would never see again. He looked smaller than I remembered. His hair was white and thinning, his arrogance stripped away by the reality of his cage, but his eyes still burned with that familiar hate. He picked up the receiver and hissed at me the moment I sat down. "I made you Jada!" He spat, his voice trembling with impotent rage. "I gave you a career. I taught you everything you know. You are nothing without me." I looked at him calmly. I did not feel fear. I did not feel anger. I felt nothing but pity for a man who had burned down his own house to keep himself warm. "No, Elijah." I said, my voice steady and clear. "You did not make me. You tried to break me. You created monsters. You created a son who steals, and a son who begs. But I created an empire." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crisp $1 bill. I slid it through the narrow slot in the metal counter. It fluttered down onto his side, resting against his handcuffs. "Here," I said, standing up. "That is the purchase price for Titan Logistics. Keep the change." I hung up the phone and walked away, leaving him screaming in a soundproof box. The single light bulb in the basement apartment buzzed overhead, casting long shadows on the peeling wallpaper. Julian sat on the edge of a mattress that smelled of mildew and regret. He had not eaten a real meal in 2 days. With shaking hands, he dialed the only number left in his contacts that might answer. It rang 4 times before his mother picked up. "Mom," he whispered into the cracked screen. "Please, I just need $50. The electricity is going to be cut off. I have nowhere else to turn." On the other end of the line, Beatrice Vance sounded like a ghost of her former self. "Julian, stop calling me," she said, her voice thin and brittle. "I am sleeping on your Aunt Linda's couch in the guest room. I lost the house. I lost the jewelry. I have nothing to give you, son. You are on your own." The line went dead. Julian dropped the phone. Across the room, a small static-filled television was playing the evening news. The screen showed a gleaming skyscraper with the name King Tower illuminated in gold. There was Jada standing on the podium, looking radiant and untouchable. Julian touched the cold glass screen, tracing the outline of the woman he had thrown away. He realized then that he was not just hungry for food. He was starving for a life he would never have again. The champagne tasted better on the rooftop of the tower we had conquered. The wind off Lake Michigan was cold, but nobody felt it. We were kept warm by the victory. I stood on the makeshift stage, looking out at the 52 faces that had saved my life. They were the ones who had packed boxes in the dark. They were the ones who had believed when nobody else did. I tapped the microphone and the laughter died down. "You all took a risk," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You left your safe jobs to follow a fired woman into a warehouse. You trusted me with your futures. Today, I am returning that trust." I gestured to the waiters, who began handing out thick cream-colored envelopes. "Go ahead," I said. "Open them." The sound of tearing paper filled the air, followed by a collective gasp. Sarah covered her mouth. her eyes filling with tears. 1% stock option, I announced. You are not just employees anymore. You are partners. We own this together. I turned to Marcus, who was staring at his certificate in disbelief. And you, Marcus, I said, get used to the corner office. You are the new Chief Technology Officer of King Logistics. The cheer that erupted was louder than the city traffic below. It was the sound of loyalty finally being paid in full. The city below us looked like a toy set from the terrace of the penthouse. It was quiet up here. The only sound was the clinking of fine china as Grandma Odessa set her teacup back on the saucer. She looked different now. The weight of the Vance family's secrets was gone from her shoulders. She reached across the small iron table and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was paper thin, but her grip was warm. You know, Jada, she said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. I watched Elijah break a lot of good people over the years. He broke your mother, too. I stiffened at the mention of my mom. She had worked as a dispatcher for Titan 20 years ago and died with nothing but a broken heart and a stack of unpaid bills. He crushed her spirit, Odessa whispered, looking out at the skyline. But you are different. You did not just survive him. You finished the fight she started. You did better than she ever could have dreamed. I squeezed her hand back, fighting the lump in my throat. I did not do it for the money, Grandma, I said softly. I did it so no one would ever have to bow to a Vance again. Odessa smiled and took another sip of tea. Then drink up, child. The war is over. The spotlight hit me, like a physical force, blinding and warm, as I walked to the center of the stage. The weight of the crystal trophy in my hands felt grounding. It was the Entrepreneur of the Year award. The room was filled with the same people who had shunned me months ago, but now they were on their feet applauding until their hands hurt. I adjusted the microphone and waited for the silence. I looked out at my team at table 1, seeing Marcus and Sarah raising their glasses. I took a deep breath. Thank you, I said, my voice echoing through the grand hall. I stand here today because of the incredible people who stood by me. But I would be remiss if I did not thank the one person who truly gave me the motivation to build this empire. My former father-in-law, Elijah Vance. A nervous ripple went through the crowd. I smiled a sharp, dangerous smile. Thank you, Elijah, for showing me exactly what kind of leader I never want to be. You thought you were burying me, but you forgot that I was a seed. By trying to destroy me, you gave me the push I needed to become unstoppable. This award is for the ones who fight back. The night wind off Lake Michigan was sharp and cold, but for the first time in months, I did not feel the need to pull my coat tighter to protect myself. I stood on the private terrace of the penthouse suite, leaning my elbows against the frosted glass railing. Below me, Chicago was a sprawling, infinite grid of amber and neon light. It looked different from up here. When I was working for Elijah, the city looked like a maze. I was trapped in a concrete cage where I had to fight for every inch of space. Now, it looked like a circuit board I had designed. The traffic on Lakeshore Drive was just a ribbon of light moving at my command. The wind whipped my hair back across my face, but I did not move to fix it. I let it blow. I closed my eyes and listened. There were no screaming shareholders, no sobbing ex-husbands begging for money, no lawyers threatening injunctions, just the low hum of the city and the steady, confident beating of my own heart. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the oxygen of absolute freedom. It tasted sweet. It tasted like ownership. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. These were the hands that had typed the code that revolutionized an industry. These were the hands that had signed the purchase order for my enemy's legacy. My phone buzzed on the glass table beside me. It was a single vibration, sharp and demanding. I opened my eyes. I did not jump. I did not feel that old spike of cortisol and adrenaline that used to come every time Elijah or Julian called late at night to demand I fix their mistakes. I picked it up. The screen illuminated the darkness. It displayed a name I had only recently added to my private contacts. Michael. He was not a banker. He was not a lawyer. He was an architect I had met during the renovation of the tower. A man who built things instead of destroying them. A man who looked at me and saw the woman, not just the CEO. I slid my thumb across the screen. "Hello, Michael," I said. My voice was low and calm, blending with the night air. "Jada." His voice came through deep and warm like whiskey poured over ice. "I was watching the news." "That was quite a speech you gave." I think I heard the sound of the old guard grinding their teeth all the way from the north side. I laughed. It was a genuine sound that bubbled up from my chest. "I think you might be right," I replied. "I hope they do not hurt themselves. I am done paying for their medical bills." There was a pause on the line, a comfortable silence that did not need to be filled with nervous chatter. "You know, Jada." Michael continued, his tone shifting from playful to something more intimate. "You have spent the last year fighting wars. You conquered the city. You saved the company. You have proven everything there is to prove. But I have a question for you." "And what is that?" I asked, looking out at the horizon where the dark water met the sky. "When was the last time you just had dinner? Not a business meeting, not a strategy session with your board, just dinner with a man who admires your mind as much as your metrics." I felt a smile tug at the corners of my lips. It was a new feeling. It was the feeling of being seen not as a weapon or a wallet, but as a person. "I am looking at my calendar, Michael," I teased gently. "It is very full. I have an empire to run." "I know," Michael said, his voice dropping an octave, soft and inviting. "That is why I am asking for just 2 hours. I know a place by the river. It is quiet. The wine is vintage. And there is a strict rule against discussing logistics." I looked at the reflection of the moon in the glass of the balcony door. I looked at the woman staring back at me. She was strong. She was successful. She was alone on a balcony, but she did not have to be lonely. I checked my watch. It was 7:30. "I think I can make an exception," I said softly. "I am free at 8. "Perfect," Michael replied. "I will be downstairs in 20 minutes. I hung up the phone and set it down. I turned back to the city one last time. The lights seemed to twinkle just for me. The war was over. The peace had begun. And for Jada King, the night was just getting started. The saga of Jada King serves as a powerful reminder that true power lies in competence, not titles. When the Vance family mistook Jada's silence for weakness, they sealed their own fate. This story illustrates that you cannot build a legacy on arrogance or nepotism. Eventually, the foundation will crumble without the people who actually do the work. Jada's victory teaches us that when you are undervalued, you do not need to argue or beg. You simply need to take your talents where they are respected. Ultimately, the best revenge isn't just destruction, it is building something better. If you have ever had to build your own table because they wouldn't give you a seat, hit that like button. Subscribe and tell us in the comments, what is the one thing you are building right now that no one can take away from you? Let's rise together.